Hey everyone, welcome to the investor.bet AFL round 21 betting trends preview. Starting this week, we go into the final month of the season and things really start to get interesting. We've got 9 teams in the race for finals. This top 4 still under the question mark. There's lots of different things that can happen through this final part of the year. Exciting times coming up. In this video, I'm going to preview all the games coming up. We're going to go through the betting trends. We're going to look at the previous matchups between these two sides. I'm going to go through who I think is going to win and how I'm approaching betting on these games this weekend. Early in the week, obviously we're only on Tuesday morning here as I'm recording this, so there's still quite a bit of time between now and the games, and I post all my final bets in the AFL best bets in the link in the description. But before we go through the matchups this week and I go through all the different research and elements that I've gone through, let's quickly look back at what happened in round 20, and overall it was a round of blowouts right up till the final game. Started with Hawthorn beating Carlton on Thursday night, 85-61. Western Bulldogs in the early game on Friday, 143-50 over Essendon. GWS came back to beat the Swans, 102-58. That game right there, Sydney were leading 23-8 at quarter time. They extended that lead at halftime out to 50 points to 22, and then in the second half, GWS outscored them 80 points to 8 to get that 44-point win. Gold Coast 130 points against the Brisbane Lions, who only scored 64, and a really big score there by the Suns considering the conditions in that game. Fremantle beat the Eagles by 49 points. Geelong beat North Melbourne by 101, kicking 150 points. Adelaide beating Port Adelaide by 98. Then on Sunday, Collingwood beat Richmond by 36, 93-57. And up until this point, every single game had been decided by at least 24 points or more. And then at three-quarter time, Melbourne were leading by 46 points against St Kilda. Up until that point in the game, St Kilda, they had only scored 40 points, but they came home with a 56-4 final quarter, aided by 2 goals to Nasiah Wanganeen-Malera in the final about 25 seconds or so or 20 seconds, I think it was, of the game, to get the win for the Saints. And definitely the game that saved the overall excitement of the round, as every game up until that point had been a blowout. Favourites won 7 of the 9 games. The 2 underdogs who won were Gold Coast beating the Brisbane Lions and then St Kilda beating Melbourne in that final game. Underdogs covered the spread in 5 of the 9 games. This season, underdogs are 86-84 overall against the spread. Home teams won 6 of the 9 games. Home teams covered 5 of the 9 games. This season, away teams slightly better against the spread, 86-84. And then 6 games went over the total, 3 games went under the closing total. This season, 94 games have gone under, 76 games have gone over. So even though this round was a little bit more towards the overs with a lot of blowouts, teams winning by big margins, and a lot of these games, the favorite and the winner contributed a lot to the games going over. But overall in the season, we've mostly had games going under the total, and we did see quite a few low totals with conditions, etc., that affected some of these games. Right now, the ladder, Collingwood 1 game clear of the Adelaide Crows. Then they are half a game clear of Brisbane. With that draw, they're on 54 points. Then you've got Geelong, Hawthorn, GWS, and Fremantle tied 4th down to 7th, all only half a game behind the Brisbane Lions and a full game behind Adelaide, who do have a really good percentage at 146. So they don't necessarily need to win more than 3 of their final 4 games to make sure they get a top 2 spot, assuming Brisbane go 4. Assuming that the Brisbane Lions don't go 4-0 to close out the year. Then you have the Gold Coast Suns on 48 and the Western Bulldogs still in the hunt on 44 with a really good percentage, better than all bar Geelong on the teams that are sitting 2 games ahead of them. Now, looking at the first game, we got 2 really good games to kick off the round. The Thursday night game between the Western Bulldogs and GWS, really, really good. And Adelaide versus Hawthorn on Friday night. So, really exciting way to kick off the round. Then we've got a few really short favourites. So, I'm going to go through how I'm going to deal with these games, and bet on them and how I'm approaching it this weekend. Starting with the Bulldogs versus GWS. The Dogs are favourites. They're $1.52 minus 11.5. All these odds are the opening odds on Monday morning, and the total is 175.5. So you can also use these to see how the odds have moved through the week, where the money's gone. Obviously, it changes after lineups come out on Thursday and Friday nights. But yeah, total pretty high here at 175.5. The Bulldogs have a great record against GWS. They've won 8 of the past 9, but all 9 of those games have been decided by the 1-39 margin. These sides met back in round 7 this season, with the Bulldogs winning 113-81 as $2.55 underdogs up in Sydney. Having a quick look at what happened in that game, the Giants had 21 scoring shots, 12 goals, 9, and the Bulldogs 28 scoring shots, 17 goals, 11. Even contest through the first half, you can see just a 5-point margin at halftime, with the Bulldogs kicking a goal through Tim English right on the halftime siren to put themselves in front going into the break. The third quarter, though, was where the Bulldogs won this game, kicking 5 goals to just the 1 behind by GWS. And that 5-point lead at halftime ballooned out to 37 points at three-quarter time and held in that range. GWS got a little run here of 3 straight goals, but outside of that, there wasn't a great deal. The stats for this game, almost 400 disposals for the Giants, but the Bulldogs an extra 15 inside 50s. At the stoppages was where they are really dominant, both at the center, 18-12 and 37-21 at the stoppages. Turnovers slightly more made by the Western Bulldogs. Contested possessions, both fairly even, slightly more uncontested like we usually see for GWS. Only the 62 marks for the Western Bulldogs as well. Tackles both around the 50 mark, but below their season averages. So dominance in the inside 50s and the stoppages was where the Bulldogs won this game. We know they have a lot of attacking firepower. They are the highest scoring side in the league right now. GWS fall in a little bit below them, but are the better defensive side, and the Bulldogs defense definitely lets them down a bit. The Bulldogs come into this game off a 93-point win against Essendon last week. And obviously they're in the need of winning games, sitting that one game outside the top 8. Prior to that, they lost against Brisbane and Adelaide by 10 and 11 points. Last week was the first time that the Bulldogs covered the spread since their win back in round 15 against Richmond. And then for GWS, they come into this game off the win against the Sydney Swans. Ended up winning that game by 44 points. They've scored 102 or more in each of their last 6 games and have played Geelong, Gold Coast and Brisbane during that period. Their defense has also been good the past 4 games since their bye, keeping 3 of those 4 opponents to 58 points or less. Sydney, Essendon and West Coast. They did concede the 85 against Geelong. GWS have covered the spread 6 straight games too. Right now with the Giants at plus 11.5, I'm definitely interested in going their way. I think the market should be a lot closer. Even though the Bulldogs got the win early this season, have a good record, I don't think they're $1.52 in this matchup. GWS, with the current form they're in, they've shown they have plenty of points in them. And the Bulldogs defense, yes, they were able to stop scoring, but prior to that, they'd given up 85 or more in 4 straight games. And you can include North Melbourne and Sydney during that period. And the only teams that struggled to score against them, realistically, if you go back through it, Richmond, St Kilda, Essendon twice, Port Adelaide. I think GWS can kick a big enough score here to keep themselves within range. It's obviously an important game for both teams, but I think it's going to be very close, so I'd rather take the plus handicap here with the points. The total at 175.5. 4 of the past 6 head-to-head have gone under the total between the Western Bulldogs and GWS. However, the last 2 games have gone over. But keep in mind, they were much lower totals than what we're seeing here. The issue, obviously, is that both these teams have plenty of points in them, and the Bulldogs in particular have a bit of a struggling defense. So at 175.5, purely on the number, I'd be leaning towards the over, but I just need to wait and see if I really want to take it as it is a pretty high number, but I would be leaning towards the overs. The Friday night game, Adelaide versus Hawthorn. The Crows at home, $1.47 for back-to-back weeks. Favourites at minus 13.5, and the total is 165.5. Hawthorn have a very good record in this matchup, winning 4 of the past 5 versus Adelaide, including 3 in a row. So they won both meetings last season and also won the meeting back in round 14 this year, which I'll bring that up and have a look. It's played it down in Tasmania in round 14. Hawthorn 6 goals 11, Adelaide 5 goals 14 in tough conditions down there in Launceston. 3-point win for the Hawks. It was a pretty closely contested game throughout. Adelaide did get out to a 21-point lead early in the second term. Hawthorn fought back, kept it close during the third quarter, and then they kicked 2 of the 3 goals in the final term to grab the win in a really close game, lots of behinds, everything like that, but due to the conditions that they were playing in. Adelaide +7 inside 50s. Free kicks were even. The clearances, both very even. Adelaide's slight advantage at the centre. Contested possession slightly in favour of the Crows. Uncontested, Hawthorn had slightly more. Big number of turnovers. Doubt we're going to see that in the game on Friday night. And as you see there, plenty of tackles as well in a very contested game. This one that obviously could have gone either way and just came down to which team just made the most of the opportunities that they had there. So now, looking ahead to this game, we know that 8 of the past 9 head-to-head have been decided by 1 to 39 points. And this is another game that I think is going to be close. Now, Adelaide, they're in fantastic form. They've won 5 in a row. They've won 8 of their past 9 games, and the only loss during that period happens to be against Hawthorn. They're coming in off a 98-point win against Port Adelaide. Prior to that, beat Gold Coast by 61 points, who then followed that up with the big win over the Brisbane Lions, and prior to that, beat Collingwood. So you can't argue with Adelaide's form line. The only hole I could pick in it is that game where they played against Gold Coast. It was the prime letdown spot for the Suns, having played Collingwood and beating them at home the week prior, and then having their game against the Brisbane Lions, which you can completely see they set themselves for on Saturday. And whilst the form definitely looks good, I think Hawthorn can definitely keep this game close. This is an important game, particularly for Hawthorn. Like Adelaide, yes, fighting for a top 2 spot, and considering their run home, it's pretty much will just come down to the game against Collingwood. But I really can't see Adelaide falling out of the top 4, that's for sure, particularly with games against West Coast after this and North Melbourne to close out the year. They haven't got too much to worry about. Hawthorn, on the other hand, they have the tricky run home. They play each of the top 3 teams to close out the season, and that's split by a game against Melbourne. So they got Adelaide, Collingwood, Melbourne, and Brisbane. I think this is one of the games Hawthorn, if they can keep this close, they may be able to jag it. So I'm liking the try bet here. I'm liking the either team 1 to 24. I think it's going to be a close game that comes down to the wire. This will be Adelaide's 3rd consecutive home game. Hawthorn haven't had to do a great deal of travel. They did lose their trip over to Perth a few weeks ago against Fremantle, but just by 13 points. Yeah, I think try bet's probably the way to go with a slight lean towards Hawthorn. I think the market should just be a little bit closer. Definitely agree that Adelaide should be the favourites, purely based on their statistics and overall current form. They're the better attacking side, but even though they're the better defensive side, Hawthorn currently ranked 3rd in points conceded, so they're not that far behind Adelaide either. So that's the way I'm most likely to expect we're going to see a pretty close game on Friday night. Should be near enough to game of the round. The total is 165.5. I make a fair total for this game in the 170s. With this total, it's not one that I have a strong lean on either way, and I think will largely come down to the flow of the game, and you'll get a gauge on it in the first quarter. My initial thoughts, with a lot on the line for both sides, is that it's more likely to be a lower scoring defensive side game. But if it is free-flowing early, then both these teams have plenty of points in them when they get rolling. It just matters on the style of the game, which we don't know how that's going to be right now. But my lean is towards it being a more defensive side of game. I think that's also Hawthorn's best shot at beating the Crows. We've seen some teams turn games into that against Adelaide, and Adelaide have been able to get away with close margin wins. And I think that's Hawthorn's best strategy here. The next game, Melbourne against West Coast. The Demons, off that loss against St Kilda, are $1.11 favourites at home, minus 38.5, and the total is 173.5. Melbourne have won and covered the past 5 of the past 6 against West Coast. They met earlier this season in Perth, with Melbourne winning 108 to 76 as $1.48 favourites. Melbourne had 28 scoring shots to 21 by the Eagles. Early in the first quarter, it was very low scoring, 14 points to 5, I should say. Then in the second term, the Eagles kicked 4 goals to 1 and got the lead at halftime, leading by 6. They also then kicked the first goal of the second half and extended that lead out to 12 points. Then Melbourne got back on top. They kicked 3 in a row and then went on another run, kicking 5 in a row into the fourth quarter, and were able to wrestle the game back and hold on to win. The team stats: Melbourne slightly more of the ball. They were plus 16 inside 50s as well. Dominated the clearances, 18 to 10 at the center and 31 to 16 at the stoppages. Melbourne, even though they made 70 turnovers, still a comfortable win for them. All signs kind of point to about the margin, close enough to 30 points for the game. This is a game I don't love, from a betting perspective. Melbourne obviously should win, but they're hardly a trustworthy team the way they're playing at the moment. They have lost 7 of their last 8 games. They've lost 2 in a row against the 15th place St Kilda and the 12th placed Carlton by 6 and 8 points. Their last 4 losses have all been by 19 or less points. They haven't really been getting blown out in the games that they've been losing. They hang around, but just struggle to get over the line at the end of the day. On paper, Melbourne win, but you have to be pretty brave to be taking $1.11 for them here. I think there's better ways to play this game. Both these teams give up plenty of disposals, so I'd certainly be looking at the props. But obviously Melbourne should be winning if they turn up somewhere near their best. The Eagles only winning the 1 game on the season, which was all the way back in round 10, so they've now lost 9 in a row. If they lose here, it makes it 10 in a row. This is likely their last winnable game of the season, with the Adelaide Crows, Western Bulldogs and Sydney Swans left to close out the season for them. Sydney in the last game of the year, both teams will just be playing for pride, like these two are as well. That's maybe a potential chance for them, but seems unlikely. But at the end of the day, Melbourne should be winning. I think it's pretty straightforward. The total is 173.5. The past 4 between these sides have gone over. Melbourne have scored 105 or more in each of the past 5 meetings as well. And West Coast, they're generally scoring around the 60 points each week, somewhere in the low 50s to 60s. They did get 77 against Fremantle last week. That was the first West Coast game to go over the total since round 12 against Geelong. They had 6 straight games go under the total. And for Melbourne, they've had 4 of their past 6 go over the total, so they're trending the opposite direction. If Melbourne score 110 points, then we'll see this game go over. If they don't get to the 100 mark, we're not going to see this game go over the total. So I'd prefer looking at Melbourne's team total as opposed to backing the full game total. But right now, slight lean towards this game going under. Just don't think these teams have enough points in them to clear this line, unless it's just they play zero defense and to see who can score more. I think that's the kind of game you're going to need to get it to go over the total. Gold Coast versus Richmond. The Suns at home again this week. They're $1.06. Favourites minus 46.5, and the total is 166.5. Gold Coast have won and covered 5 of the past 6 against Richmond, winning the matchup earlier this season by 11 points. Down in Melbourne at Marvel Stadium, they were $9 odds, so just a tiny bit shorter than what they are for this game. The handicap there was 43.5. Let's have a look at what happened in that game that contributed to Richmond winning. They had 20 scoring shots. Gold Coast kicked 9 goals, 15, so we can already see the accuracy was the difference, with the Suns having an extra 2 scoring shots but kicking 3 less goals. Richmond led this game start to finish. They kicked the first goal of the game through Tom Lynch just under 2 minutes in, then followed that up with another 2 quick goals, and it established an 18-point lead or 17-point lead pretty early on. And then they were able to maintain that. Gold Coast got it back to a close margin just before halftime, but a couple of late goals by Richmond pushed it back out to 14 points. And then they kicked the first 4 goals off the third term and really skipped away. At 3/4 time, Richmond were leading 78-35. Gold Coast, they kicked 5 goals and Richmond didn't kick a goal in the fourth quarter. It got all the way back to 11, but was a little bit too far. This time around, them playing at Gold Coast, I definitely can't see the Suns losing this game. They also had 20 extra inside 50s. Stoppages were won by Gold Coast as well. So just didn't take their chances is ultimately what this game came down to, and Richmond were able to rebound the ball out of their defensive 50 well enough to limit the Suns' scoring. Richmond, they had won 2 in a row prior to the game last week against Collingwood, where they ended up losing by 36 points. Prior to that being West Coast and Essendon. They have lots of games leading. Basically, their last 5 losses have all been by 36 points or less. I'd be leaning towards the Suns covering this minus 46.5 point handicap, even though back in round 6, Richmond beat them. Definitely can't see that happening again. I think Gold Coast, assuming fine conditions on the weekend, this will be early afternoon game, kind of twilight game. Gold Coast could probably win this game by near enough to 100 points if they're switched on. Following this game, Gold Coast travel down to Melbourne to play Carlton, so they don't have a big game coming up after it or anything. The only way Gold Coast don't blow out Richmond here is if they have a bit of a letdown performance after a big win against the Lions last week. That's the only way that happens, but with them being at home, we've seen their home games this season, they play extremely well, and Collingwood have gone there, lost. Brisbane Lions have gone there and lost. That's your last 2 premiership winners. Both those teams have struggled. It's hard to see anything but Richmond struggling as well. The past 7 being decided by 1-39. That obviously shows that historically this matchup has been close. But last time they met on the Gold Coast was the opening round last season, and Gold Coast won that game by 39 points. I don't think it's too much to ask that they win this game by 8 points more than they won that one by, and I think we'll see Gold Coast winning big on Saturday. The total is 166.5. 6 of the past 7 head-to-head have gone under, including the last 4. The total down at Marvel earlier in the year was 184.5. Gold Coast do have plenty of points in them. They obviously scored 130 in pretty torrential rain last week against the Brisbane Lions, who are one of the best defensive sides. So if Gold Coast kick 110, 120 points, we'll see this go over. Numbers-wise, I think this total is pretty accurate because Richmond generally don't really have many points in them, particularly against better opposition. When you look through their recent form, 57 against Collingwood. They kicked 105 against West Coast, who are the worst defensive team in the competition. That's not going to happen here. Then 46, 52, 54, 56, 36 were their previous 7 games. So they've only had 1 game, which was against West Coast, where they've scored more than 57 points. Now, with that in mind, Gold Coast likely going to have to kick 110 to get this game to go over the total, but definitely prefer the handicap in this matchup. Gold Coast players should also get plenty of the ball. Richmond give up just about more disposals than anyone to the opposition, and so there's those few ball winners who've really stepped up lately for Gold Coast, and a few other players around it that you can look at as also good betting options. The Sydney Swans versus Essendon, we've got another short favourite here, $1.05 for the Swans, and they're minus 49.5. The total is 159.5. Sydney, they've won 3 of the past 4 versus Essendon, and also 10 of the past 11 between these sides have been decided by 1-39 points. They met earlier this season at Marvel Stadium, with Essendon winning 71-63 as $2.30 underdogs. So that is definitely surprising there to see that, considering what the odds are for this game. And that was only back in round 9, so it wasn't all that long ago. That time, Essendon kicked 11 goals, 5 for the 71 points, and Sydney 8 goals, 15. So they had 23 scoring shots to Essendon just having the 16 and ended up losing the game. That's the exact kind of situation where accuracy absolutely cost you the game. They also gave up 444 disposals for Essendon. Plenty, I'm guessing, uncontested possessions when we go through 320. That's almost 80 above Essendon's season average so far, where the Swans were right on their average. So they gave up way too much ball. The Swans, an extra 16 inside 50s though, at the end of the day, should have still been able to win the game. Centre clearances won by Essendon 10-5, stoppages 27-22 by Sydney. Turnovers were right on even, 126 marks by the Bombers. Very interesting to see how that game played out. This time around, with the form Essendon are in, it's hard to see them winning this game again and making it 2-0 on the season against Sydney. Essendon's form leading in, they've lost 8 straight, and it's the last 6 by at least the 41 points, and obviously losing last week against the Western Bulldogs by 93. The only game that they've lost by less than 41 points was against Richmond. So the way Essendon are losing games does interest you a little bit in the Swans at the handicap. However, whether Sydney cover this handicap or not, I think comes down to their attitude. They were in a very good position in the first half. They played a great first half against GWS. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, were completely overrun in the second half and ended up losing the game by 44 points. They've failed to cover 3 in a row. Didn't cover against North Melbourne, even though they won. Didn't cover against St Kilda when they beat them by 5 points. This season, Sydney have only won 1 game by 50 points or more, and that was all the way back in round 4. It was at Marvel Stadium against North Melbourne. Now, with Sydney being at home, they'll win this game. Can't see them giving it up against Essendon, but I wouldn't be keen on taking them to win by 50 plus. I think even if Essendon plays somewhat okay, they can keep it close. Just Sydney playing 4 full quarters definitely worries me. There could be opportunities for you to play some quarter plays in this game, like first quarters or first halves. Essendon are one of the worst first quarter teams. Sydney aren't that bad. So Sydney may be able to get the jump on them early. You could look at that first quarter line. Also, fourth quarters. That's where Sydney have been a lot better this season. And another area where Essendon struggles, those first and fourth quarters. Potentially looking at those handicaps as opposed to the full game. The total is 159.5. Whilst this is low and it's fairly considerably low compared to what it was earlier this season, albeit at an indoor venue, you got a 13-point lower total. That game, they only had 134 points scored. This game would make a fair total 154.5. So straight off that, leaning towards the under. But once again, Essendon don't really have many points to them. It's going to come down to just how many points they give up against this Swan side. The Swans, their highest score on the season is 117 points, which came in that round 4 game against North Melbourne. They have had a few games lately, like 4 of their past 5, they've scored between 84 and 96 points. If they can get the 96 and be on the high side of that, then it'll probably go very close, because I can really only see Essendon scoring around 50, 55 points at most here. They don't really have enough attacking firepower to score 70, 80 points, which you'd need if this game is close for it to then go over the total. So slight lean towards the under, but it really hinges on the Swans. Another really good game. This one's up there with the opening 2 games of the round. Collingwood against the Brisbane Lions. The Pies are $1.58 favourites, minus 8.5 handicap, and the total is 164.5. Collingwood, they've now won the past 4 against the Brisbane Lions, starting with the grand final back in 2023, where Collingwood won 90-86. They've then won at the Gabba 92-72, 79-78 at the MCG, and then earlier this season 105-53 at the Gabba as $2.55 underdogs. What happened in that game? Brisbane 7 goals, 11, 18 scoring shots, where Collingwood 16 goals, 9, 25 scoring shots. The game was close through the first quarter. Collingwood started to get away late in the second term with a couple of goals close on half time. That pushed the margin out to 19 points, and then they kicked 4 goals to 1 in the third quarter, and then 4 goals to 2 in the fourth quarter to run out dominant winners. The stats for that game, the amount of ball was pretty even between the both sides, but 51-37 inside 50 is an extremely low number there by the Brisbane Lions. Clearances, both the centre and stoppages, controlled by Collingwood. Both sides only around the 100 contested possessions, and both low turnovers. Wasn't a mistake-riddled game or anything like that Collingwood were able to capitalize on too much. You can look a little bit deeper into the scores from turnovers and that kind of thing, which we'll do later in the week. Marks 116 by the Lions. Yeah, overall, really low tackle game as well. Definitely agree Collingwood to be favourites here, but they have been keeping games certainly close in recent times and haven't really been putting teams away. Like, it's what we've come to expect by Collingwood. They do enough to win without making big statements or anything like that. Aside from the game back in round 1 against Port, all their wins have been by 56 points or less, and they've only lost the 4 games overall on the season. Coming into this game, they're playing at the MCG back-to-back weeks. Brisbane played on the Gold Coast last week, now travel down to Melbourne. So it's back-to-back road games for them. As I said, definitely agree Collingwood should be favourites. They have the recent form against Brisbane. Brisbane aren't really in the greatest form either themselves. Losing by 66 points against Gold Coast last week. They only won by 10 over the Western Bulldogs. Didn't make that big of a statement or anything in that game. And then wins against Carlton and Port Adelaide, not too much to get excited about. Back before the bye, they beat Geelong at GMHBA Stadium by 41 points. That's definitely their best win in the past couple of months, that's for sure. Potentially, Brisbane had a bit of an eye on this game last week. You could look at it. That's why they played so badly against Gold Coast too. But I just think Collingwood, it's hard to see this game being a blowout either way, to be fair. I can't see Brisbane losing again by 30, 40, 50 points like they did last week. I think this one will be much closer. So I like the try bet here, but I do think Collingwood probably scrape out a close win. The total at 164.5. The past 3 head-to-head have gone under the total. Make a fair total for this game at 170, so slight lean towards the over. Brisbane, they've been a little bit up and down this season in terms of games going over under the total. They've had a more recent trend towards games going under. And then for Collingwood, they've had their last 3 all go under. So I can understand why the bookmakers have set this at 164.5, made it close to 10 points lower than the handicap at the Gabba and 6 points lower than what it was at the MCG last season in round 23. But even though the numbers lean slightly towards the overs, with these sides going up against each other, you've got 2 really good defensive sides. So Collingwood, they are the number 1 defensive side. Brisbane in the top half of the competition defensively. And neither side are a top 4 attacking team. They both average around the 90 points a game. But that's obviously going to come down with this matchup. And I think we'll see close contest. And the other thing is neither of these teams are accurate in front of goal. And we've seen it come up a little bit more recently. Both of them missing plenty of shots. And that's even pushing those numbers down even more. This is going to be a high pressure game, and whether they can convert in front of goal will give us a good indication on these teams going into finals as well. St Kilda versus North Melbourne. The Saints, off that win last week, are $1.28 favourites, minus 22.5, and the total is 174.5. St Kilda, they've won the past 5 against North Melbourne, and they've won the 4 of the past 5 by at least 20 points. They haven't met for quite a while now. Round 8 last season was their last meeting, and St Kilda, as $1.13 favourites, won that game 103-65. They had 28 scoring shots to 15 in that win, and North Melbourne had a lead early on, but after that point where North kicked 3 straight goals, St Kilda went on their own run, kicking 6 in a row themselves, and established almost a 5-goal lead at that point, and were able to keep it within that range basically through the rest of the game. Ended up winning by 38 points. The stats for that matchup: St Kilda almost the 400 disposals. They are plus 25 inside 50s. Clearances slightly in favour of St Kilda, particularly at the stoppages. More contested ball, more uncontested. North slightly more turnovers, and 128-69 marks. That's a huge differential between the two teams there. Expect St Kilda to win this game, I should say. That win last week, I think, would have given them plenty of confidence. There's not much value in them at $1.28, even though they're playing North Melbourne, who are struggling to beat anybody at the moment and also struggling to keep close. But St Kilda, that win last week was their first win since round 12 against Melbourne. So their last 2 wins have come against Melbourne, and that counts for their last 11 games. So they're 2-9 and have lost to all 9 other opponents. But North Melbourne, they're not, as I said, not traveling a great deal better. They have lost 5 in a row and lost by 101 points. They had their biggest loss of the season last week against Geelong. They've only scored 102 combined points in their last 2 games against Geelong and Sydney. They've lost each of these last 5 games by at least 31 points. Now, St Kilda should win, I think, if they can just generate some confidence and momentum through the way they finished that 4th quarter last week. They'll win this game. Whether I want to take $1.28 or back them to cover 22, I'm not sure. The history between the teams and last week's performance would lean you towards doing that, but I just don't want to put too much weight. So I'm going to do a bit more investigating into this game. The total is 174.5. The past 6 in a row between them have gone under the total. Last time they met, the total was 170.5. It's a little bit higher this time around. North Melbourne, they've had 4 of their past 5 games go over, and St Kilda, they've been a big over team as well. They've had 4 straight go over and 6 of their last 7 go over. You got 2 opposite trends here. The matchup has historically been unders, but both teams favoring the overs right now. I think this can be a real free-flowing game, particularly at Marvel Stadium. We should see points. I would have loved to see a slightly lower number because this total is a little bit more than I was expecting, but off current form, I'd be leaning towards there being points and it going over the number. Geelong versus Port Adelaide. The Cats $1.08 and minus 43.5. We've got no total for this game, but right now I make a fair total 174.5. So we'll see when the total goes up, see what they put it up as. But Geelong, they've won 3 of the past 4 against Port Adelaide, and they've won the past 2 by 76 and 84 points. They met in round 10 this season at the Adelaide Oval, Geelong winning as 8.5 point favourites. Now they're 43.5 point favourites, and we're $1.60 there on the money line. Now they're $1.08. So big turnaround. Geelong obviously playing at home this time around. What happened there? 30 scoring shots to 14, only 5 goals to 17. Huge differential between the two teams. In fairness to Port Adelaide, it was very close through the first half, and it was just the second half where Geelong ran away with this game. 3 goals to 5 at halftime, just a 9-point margin between the two teams. But Port Adelaide, they only scored 2 goals in the second half, 1 in the third, 1 in the fourth, whereas Geelong went 5 goals, 7 goals. So 12 goals to 2 in that second half to win the game. Disposals were even, but Geelong had an extra 15 inside 50s. They also won the centre clearances 12-8 and 31-22 at the stoppages. Slightly more contested ball. Turnovers were pretty even. Slightly more marks there for Geelong as well. And then Geelong will be winning this game. I think that's very obvious to everyone. It's just a matter of how much they win by. Port Adelaide, to be honest, I can't really see them keeping this game close. If Geelong play close to the 100% of what we know they're capable of, they'll cover this minus 43.5. It's only if they somewhat take this game lightly and just do enough to win that they won't. But they're going to win the game regardless. It's just a matter of how much. And I right now will be leaning towards them winning this game by 44 points or more. They are the number 2 attacking side, averaging 102.6 points a game, whereas Port Adelaide rank 15th at 74.7, and Geelong top 4 defensive side as well, and Port Adelaide are a bottom 6 defensive side. So you got a huge differential between the two teams, and along with there's a few games this week where the handicap's in the 40s. Gold Coast is one that I like in that range, and Geelong is the other one. They're the two teams that we know have a lot of attacking firepower, and they also have a defensive matchup, and they're all also at home as well. So I think Geelong will win this game and win it very comfortably. They don't necessarily need a percentage booster, so I'd be more confident if Geelong, with where they're sitting on the ladder and what their percentage was, if a 50-point win would have really helped them shore up their spot against their opponents, but they have one of the better percentages of those teams, so it doesn't matter as much, and they have a very easy run home, so I don't think they're going to be all that worried. Essendon, Sydney and Richmond follow this, so pretty much the easiest run home. But they beat North Melbourne by 101 last week. They beat St Kilda by 31, Richmond by 72. A couple of losses in there against GWS and the Brisbane Lions. But Geelong pretty much win every game they do by 24 points or more. That's been their recent kind of trend. So if they don't cover the 43.5, they'll go very close to covering it. That's the way that I'd be interested in going. 5 of the past 6 have gone over. As I said, expecting a mid-170s total, similar to what it was earlier this season at the Adelaide Oval. Maybe a couple of points lower than that. Geelong will obviously need to contribute to it going over. All the points are going to come from them. They've scored 113 or more in 3 of the 4 games since their bye in round 16. The only exception, the 85 they scored against GWS. Port Adelaide, they've barely found any points of late. 35 against the Crows and 49 against Hawthorn in their last 2 games. It's really tough for me to see them scoring much over the 60 points, maybe 65 at a push. And that therefore means Geelong are going to need around 115 points to get this game to go over that total, if that's what the number goes up as. So we'll see what that is at, but likely would lean towards the Cats team total in preference if you like the over. And yeah, so probably a game that I'm not super keen on playing the totals, but there are obviously options in terms of Geelong scoring. The other thing with this game is Jeremy Cameron needs 30 goals, I think it is, to get to 100 goals on the season. It obviously seems unlikely that he'll get there with just the 4 games remaining, but Geelong have very easy opponents left to close out the year. And if he gets 7 to 8 goals each game, then he'd get there. He'll probably definitely need a game where he gets another one with the 10, 11, 12 goals to lower the overall average that he'd need across the other 3 games. But potentially do Geelong try and do enough to win the game, but then get Cameron goals? I doubt it, but there's that as well, which could take away a little bit of the scoring, because then if you go looking for a player, it messes up your attack and go forward. Fremantle versus Carlton. The Dockers favourites $1.21 minus 27.5, and the total is 158.5. Carlton, who are the big $4.50 underdogs here, have won and covered 7 of the past 8 versus Fremantle, and did beat them last season 73-63 at the Adelaide Oval. Last time they met in Perth, Carlton won that game as Tudor and 2 outsiders 98-45. Obviously, this time around, these teams are trending in completely opposite directions. Fremantle, they've won 3 in a row and won 9 off their last 10 games, coming up a 49-point win against West Coast last week, so back-to-back home games for them. And Carlton, who do get the rest advantage coming into this game, having played the Thursday night game against Hawthorn, where they lost by 24 points, but now need to travel over to Perth. Carlton, they've lost 5 of their last 6 games, 4 of those losses being by at least 24 points. Fremantle will win this game. I can't really see any other outcome. This would really hurt Freo if they were to lose this game, considering they have Port, Brisbane, and Western Bulldogs coming up. The Lions and Bulldogs games definitely going to be tough, but they should win against Port. It is at the Adelaide Oval, though. So Fremantle can't really afford to drop this game, considering where they're sitting on the ladder. They're on 52 points, but they have a poor percentage. They could technically use this game as a bit of a percentage booster. That would definitely be in their best interest to do that, considering the games that they have coming up. But it's certainly not a game they can afford to drop. Otherwise, it turns to the fact that they're going to have to win, likely the game against the Western Bulldogs come the end of the year. That's probably going to be the most important one, and it is on the road at Marvel Stadium. So Fremantle should be winning. We'll just quickly look at what happened in round 4 last season. Obviously going back quite some time to get to this game. Fremantle, 18 scoring shots, 9 goals, 9. Carlton, 23 scoring shots, 10 goals, 13. It was a bit of a back and forth game, plenty of lead changes. No team really ever led by much more than 10 points. Fremantle got out to a 2-goal lead there, but outside of that, it was a 10-point margin either way throughout the entire game. Statistically, inside 50s, fairly even. Stoppages, both in favour of Fremantle. We expect that to continue again into this game. Fremantle did make 76 turnovers, so that was likely costly, and potentially if Carlton capitalised on them, which I just don't have those numbers on the screen right now, would have probably cost them in what was a close game at the end of the day. But Fremantle to win, I think, in my opinion, they need to use this game as a percentage booster. Carlton, in terms of the points that they lose by, as I said, they generally lose in games by this 4-goal mark. So we could see one that is very close to this handicap. But it's another one where I'd lean towards Fremantle covering if I was to take a side. The total at 158.5, I think they've got this one pretty spot on. And I guess similar to the handicap, because when you look at what these teams score, Carlton, very consistent around this 60 to low 60s. Sometimes they'll get an extra goal or 2, but they'll score around the 60 points, 65, and then Fremantle around the 90, 95 points. That gets you spot on to the 160 total. And yeah, based on the way these teams play, I think it's going to be very close on both of those marks. So I'll be looking at other ways to play it and potentially look at some alternate lines to make sure we can hit in the final game of the round. So that's my early look on the games coming up this weekend. If you want to see all my final bets, go to the link in the description. That's where you can also use the bet finder tools to study bets and see how you can use statistics and information to make sure you're making the best betting decisions. Really appreciate you guys watching, following along on the channel. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any videos through the rest of the season and then in finals. Really exciting time gearing up for these last 4 weeks.